what it's like going shooting in Panama, and why you should be very glad you have the Second Amendment. That's all coming up on this episode of The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. I'm in Panama today, and it's a beautiful day. I'm out at the Balboa Gun Club, so you're going to hear some shooting in the background. This is one of the few places in the entire country of Panama where you can go and shoot firearms. And here's what makes that difficult. First of all, there's a moratorium on the importation of firearms, and has been for about 10 years now, into Panama. So that means that the only guns available are the ones that are already in Panama. That makes a $500 Glock pistol, for example, cost about $4,000 in this country. And so that obviously makes it real difficult for the average person to get and own a gun. Also, if you want to have a gun in Panama, you have to get a permit. And in order to get a permit, you have to get a background check, you have to get a drug test, you have to take a mental fitness test, you have to take a skills qualification test, and you have to buy the gun first in order to turn it into the police so that they can do a ballistic fingerprint on your firearm before you get your permit. Now, the difficulty that creates is that if you spend $4,000 on a gun and you go through your testing and you fail any one of those things, you fail the eye exam, you fail the drug test for some reason, you had too many poppy seeds on your muffin this morning or whatever, then you fail and don't get your permit, and you don't get your gun back. So you just lost that $4,000. What that has an effect of doing is basically makes shooting in Panama a sport only for the very rich. And the ammunition is about the same cost as it is in the United States. But again, because of the cost of getting a legal firearm and maintaining that permit, it makes it very, very difficult for the average person to have a gun. Now, they do have fairly decent, what we would call castle doctrine in Panama. That means that if somebody comes into your home without your permission, you may defend yourself. And if you kill them in the process, you're not going to go to jail for that. There's going to be an investigation, and they'll say, hey, thank you very much, you did the right thing. The problem is, again, the rules around having a gun to begin with. So what that does is it makes anybody who has a firearm a serious target for criminals because there's such a limited supply. And so if somebody finds out you've got a gun, they're very likely that if word gets around, somebody's going to try to break into your house or your car or whatever, you're going to be targeted for that firearm. People don't think about that very much in the United States, where pretty much anybody can have a gun, and so you're not going to be targeted specifically for your gun unless you make it obvious that you have one by putting gun stickers on your car, which I think is a really bad idea, by wearing gun stuff all the time. I really prefer to go the gray man route, where I try not to look like a gun kind of guy. Now, obviously, when I'm out here on the range, I'm wearing, olive drab, and that's fine. But in everyday life, I don't want to dress like that because it just makes me a target, especially here in Panama. Now, one of the things about that kind of a gun culture is you would think that it would dramatically reduce violence. Well, statistically, violent crime in Panama is much higher than it is in the United States. Now, in reality, if you're not involved in the drug trade and you don't get between people who are involved in the drug trade, then you're probably fine in Panama. But you follow those rules of stupid that John Correa likes to cite. That is, don't go stupid places at stupid times and do stupid things with stupid people for stupid reasons. Then you're going to be fine pretty much anywhere you go. But from a purely statistical standpoint, there is much more violent crime in Panama than there is in most places in the United States. And I don't see it because I don't get involved in it, but that's just the truth. And so when you're measuring gun violence in a place like the United States, where there's more than one gun per person. There's over 450 million guns in the United States and only 330 million people. Well, you go to someplace like Panama, and I would say that the rate of gun ownership is something like probably 2%, if that. And that means, again, criminals have guns. The state of those guns is typically not very good. Obviously, they don't have any training with those guns. And again, if you have the money, if you have the wherewithal to buy a firearm here in Panama, then you're probably going to be the only person in your neighborhood that has one legally. But that doesn't mean you're going to be the only person in your neighborhood that has one, because criminals will get guns illegally, beg, borrow, and steal, however, and import them from Colombia or whatever. And so it is not uncommon to see armed robberies take place even on the street here in Panama. In restaurants, people have been known to bad guys go into restaurants and rob the entire restaurant. Go in, shut the door, hold a gun on everybody, and just rob everybody in the restaurant. That obviously would not happen if there was such a thing as concealed carry, if there was such a thing as an easier way for law-abiding people to get firearms. In reality, when it comes to statistics, places that allow law-abiding people to protect themselves, that facilitate law-abiding people and enable them to protect themselves, tend to be safer places. And that's just the long and the short of it. So one of the things that shooting in Panama makes me, reminds me of, is the incredible value of the freedom that we have, that freedom to defend ourselves. And think about this now. Everyone has the freedom to defend themselves. It's just whether or not the government chooses to recognize that freedom. You can never, nobody could ever tell you that if you get attacked, you have to choose to just submit and take it. You have the right to protect yourself in every situation when somebody attacks you. But depending on where you live, you may or may not be punished for exercising that right. Fortunately, in the United States, because of the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, we have ratified in our Constitution that right to self-defense. And going to a place where you don't necessarily have that right is one of the best ways, I think, to really get a sense of how valuable that freedom truly is. One of the things about people who argue for the removal of those kinds of ratifications of rights in the United States is that they're doing so in the context, in a bubble where they're being protected by people who exercise that right. Have you ever thought about that? And so, they can advocate for making everybody more vulnerable in the name of making everybody safer, but making everybody more vulnerable is never a good way to make people safer, because the criminals, the evil elements of society, will always find a way to execute their evil plans. And that can be seen just by looking at history. If you look at the history of the recent history in the United States, terror attacks that have taken place with knives, terror attacks that have taken place where a guy rents a pickup truck and just runs people over. People will find a way to execute their evil intent. And the only real question that the government needs to face is whether or not they will enable or facilitate people to be able to exercise their inherent right of self-defense. So that's my sermon for today on that. Now let's talk about a few other things.
The bridge over the river Tachira between Venezuela and Colombia is back open for the time being. If you've been watching this podcast, you've seen me reporting from this bridge many times over the past 4 months. Thousands of people crossed into Colombia on Saturday to buy food and medicine after Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro reopened the border between the countries that had been shut down since attempts by the United States to ship aid across the same bridges resulted in the aid being burned back in February. For the past 4 months, these shipping containers have blocked vehicular access to the bridges between Colombia and Venezuela in the town of Cucuta. With the reopening, a flood of people seized on the opportunity to enter Colombia across the river Tachira and secure items that are all but unattainable in Venezuela. This is obviously something that was still happening when the bridges were closed. You've seen me report extensively on that this year from this very spot. But as the gangs loyal to Maduro extorted people on one side and Colombian rebel groups have started to extort people on the other side, the bridge opening to all pedestrian traffic just means that people don't have to be quite so victimized every time they cross. But don't take this as a sign that things are getting better in any way along the border or in Venezuela itself. They aren't. Inflation is still dropping the value of the Venezuelan bolivar by half about every 6 weeks or so. Food and medicine are so scarce inside the country that Maduro opened this border specifically because he needs people to be able to get the supplies they need to survive in order to stave off what many see as his inevitable fall from power. So he's trying to forestall the eventuality, at the same time trying to appear magnanimous by opening the border. The flood of people leaving Venezuela for good continues to grow. Now over 4 million people have left, and that's the official numbers. They don't take into account the likely millions more who have left who don't have any documents. But even 4 million amounts to about 15% of the total population, and more are leaving all the time. And more Venezuelans are choosing to come to the United States when they do leave. Last week, news broke that Venezuelans in 2018 became the number one group of people making asylum claims in the U.S. Venezuela has now overtaken China to become the number one country of origin for those claiming asylum in the United States upon arrival or shortly after, with 30,000 Venezuelans applying for asylum with U.S. citizens and immigration services in 2018. Now, this will undoubtedly be much higher this year in 2019. So there is a vital national security interest that the U.S. has in doing whatever we can to stop the suffering in Venezuela. In the meantime, many private organizations are stepping in to offer assistance. On my last trip to Cucuta, I accompanied Stronghold Rescue and Relief Services and Ephraim Mattis as we helped them put together some people on the ground who could get the aid we send directly to the people who need it the most. Take a look at that.
This is the entrance to La Trocha, the illegal crossing that goes across the river Tachira into Venezuela. You can see the people coming and going here. This is something that's been going on for some time, but something significant has changed over the last couple of weeks. And what we're seeing now is the Venezuelan gangs who were extorting money from people that were crossing the river are still doing that, but now the Colombian side is seeing rebel groups like the ELN that have wanted to get in on the action. And so they now have guys stationed on the Colombian side that are also extorting money from people. So I'm told that the people crossing here now have to pay twice to get across.
These Colombian paramilitaries attacked a restaurant near the border on May 30th, killing one and wounding 14 others, reportedly because the owner refused to pay extortion money to the gang. Attempts to get help into Venezuela have been largely unsuccessful since forces loyal to dictator Nicolás Maduro burned aid trucks on the border bridge back in February. So this former Navy SEAL is taking a more covert approach. Ephraim Mattis started a nonprofit 2 years ago that sends aid into the hardest to reach areas of need around the world. It's called Stronghold Rescue and Relief.
Stronghold's unique mission also requires unique individuals with unique skills. We're not bringing in large groups of people, and we're completely trying to avoid the idea of voluntourism. So most of the time what we do is we send in 2 or 3 guys who then enable the locals, and we create the capacity for the locals to then be able to help themselves.
After leaving the Navy in 2017, Mattis spent months in Iraq working as a combat medic on the front lines in the battle against ISIS. During intense combat, Mattis was shot while helping to rescue a little Iraqi girl. That experience led to the idea of recruiting other special operators for this unique mission.
So I learned during my time in Afghanistan and in other places that we need to put a local face and enable the locals to be able to take care of themselves.
Here in Cucuta, Mattis contacted Venezuelan soldiers who have defected and is working with them to help people who are literally dying without needed medication.
We're actually partnering with former soldiers from the Maduro regime who've defected, and we're enabling them to smuggle supplies into the people who absolutely need them the most.
Stronghold is still there, and they're really making a difference because they're experts at recruiting people in the midst of the problem and then helping them help their neighbors. So go check out strongholdrescue.org, and I'd encourage you to give generously. The need there is so acute. And groups like these, Stronghold Rescue, Operation Blessing, they really do a great job of magnifying your dollars to help the most people possible. All right, that's all for today, folks. Thanks for watching or listening. Please follow us on Facebook for updates on important areas of crisis around the globe. I love your feedback, so let me know what you think by leaving a review. I'm Chuck Holton. God bless you all, and thanks for being a part of the Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.